Culture Iranian Style, with a reception to follow just across the hallway. I am Marl Sahib Jami, a first-year PhD student in the Near and Middle Eastern Studies program here at the UW. In the time that I've been here, I have had the opportunity to work with and learn from a talented faculty with expertise in a variety of disciplines. I met Professor Rahimi as an undergraduate, and she has been my mentor for many years, and I'm very honored to see her here at the UW tonight. At this time, I would like to turn the mic over to the chair of the Department of Near Eastern Languages and Civilizations, as well as the director of our Persian Studies program here at the UW, so that he can tell you more about tonight's program. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Selim Kuru.
Thank you all. We have wonderful students here. Maral Sahib Jam'i, works on modern Iran with Professor Arzu Usanlu and gender. She's up there, yes. And thank you for coming here on a Thursday night after a beautiful sunny day in Seattle, after a sun break. We call it a sun breaks, right? Several of them today. And I'm always happy to see this enthusiastic and enthusiasm-inducing community of Iranians, Iranian Americans, Persian speakers, Persian lovers, all together constituting a strong community in Seattle. This community recently raised more than $100,000 in support of the Near Eastern Languages and Civilization Persian and Iranian Studies program through a gala event that was run by the community. We started a new endowment under the program's name in order to support education, research, and promotion of knowledge of Iran and Persian languages and cultures. When I started at the University of Washington as a new professor, I wasn't that young. The first public event that I attended was coincidentally the inaugural Afrasiabi lecture in 1999. We Turks always appear wherever there are Iranians. The Iranians can't be without Turks around. And vice versa is not true, unfortunately. The 13th Afrasiabi lecture tonight is supported by the Afrasiabi Endowment, which was established in memory of a wonderful person. I wish I had the chance to meet him. A wonderful person, Hoshang Afrasiabi, by his loving family. The series is one of the staples of the Near Eastern Languages and Civilization Department, this lecture series. I would like to thank Afrasiabi family and their friends for their constant support of this endowment, our program, and in general culture of Iran and Persian in Seattle. As the Afrasiabi Endowment grows, we will be able to make the lecture series an annual event, inshallah, so that we can invite more scholars, authors, poets, journalists to promote Iran and Persian culture from who will present us with different viewpoints. Your gifts won't hurt on the way to achieve this goal, as you know. At Near Eastern Languages and Civilization Department, Persian Studies has a special place. I would like to thank to our faculty, a dedicated faculty. I will introduce Professor Samad Alawi shortly. Our inimitable lecturer Sherzad Shams here creates wonders in education and community outreach in Seattle. Thanks are also due to faculty from other departments and programs, among many. I may mention, since they are here, the director of the Middle East Center, Professor Arzu Usanlu of the Law, Society and Justice program, and Professor Joel Walker from History Department, who served as the director of the Persian and Iranian Studies program for 3 years, and then Dan Sheffield, a new addition to the History Department faculty, who works on different cultures of Iran, I will say. He may correct me. Events like the Afrasiabi lecture series don't happen by themselves, unfortunately. I wish they were. They take a lot of preparation, a lot of groundwork, communication, organization, reservations, and dedication. Thankfully at NALC, the Near Eastern Languages and Civilization Department, we have a truly dedicated group of friends. Sumi Hayashi is not only a brilliant administrator, but also a wonderful person. And Rick Aguilar, who is sitting next to her, is not our administrative assistant, is behind the wonderful Near Eastern Languages, Civilizations posters on top of the office work. They work a lot. And Gabe Skoog, who is our student advisor, is not here tonight. But these three individuals keep all our programs running. It is not an easy job, but they do it just right in a perfectly smooth manner. Last but not least, the University of Washington Advancement Office has always been a great help to further the study of Iran and Persian at the University of Washington in Seattle. Sharon Dana is back after a hiatus following a maternity leave, and she has been a great help to organize this particular event as well as the slideshow. Before inviting Dr. Alavi to present our speaker, let me repeat that we are having a reception after Professor Rahimi's talk in the Walker Ames room across the corridor. Professor Rahimi will also have an informal conversation with students and faculty tomorrow at 2 p.m. in NALC's new and temporary home, Condon Hall, in room 311. Another event that represents the strength and togetherness of the diverse Iranian community in Seattle is this Sunday at 2 p.m. sharp. It is the 133rd session of Iraj Agha's Persian Poetry and Music Workshop, presenting music and Dr. Afshin Sepehri's talk on relations between science and literature. One more event, the fourth monthly Dökü Nights event, organized by our wonderful teaching assistant, he's not here I guess tonight, Mohsen Sherifani Shirazi. On March 2, not Shirazi? Esfahani. Anyway, okay. It's okay. On March 2, this Wednesday, there is a documentary. You can find information at the entrance about the documentary. By liking our now Facebook page, on the Facebook, you can learn more about these wonderful events. Sumi Hayashi is administering the website and she's very keen on it, so it's very informative. If you're not Facebook friendly, please drop your email address with us and you will be a part of our listserv. I'm very happy to have tonight Professor Nasrin Hamidiyeh as the 13th Afrasiabi Distinguished Lecturer. And our Persian Literature Professor, Dr. Samet Alavi, will introduce her work to us. Dr. Alavi joined NALC faculty 3 years ago. He works on politics and poetics of literary expression in Persian. His dissertation on political commitment in Persian poetry won the biennial Rahim Irvine Dissertation Award, and he is currently completing his book. He is also working on his second project about prison memoirs from Iran. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being so good with our program, so supportive. And thank you for giving to Persian and Iranian Studies program. Samet.
Good evening, everyone. It's my great pleasure and honor to introduce our speaker for this evening. Dr. Nasrin Rahimi is Professor of Comparative Literature and the Howard Baskerville Professor of Humanities at the University of California in Irvine. Her list of publications is long. I'll give you some highlights. She's the author of the books Oriental Responses to the West, Comparative Essays on Muslim Writers from the Middle East, Missing Persians, Discovering Voices in Iranian Cultural Heritage, and her latest book, which just came out this year, last year, 2015, Iranian Culture, Representation, and Identity. Dr. Rahimi has also served as the president of the International Society for Iranian Studies. And she served as the founding chair, the Masih chair, and the founding director of the Samuel Jordan Center for Persian Studies and Culture at UC Irvine, which I probably don't need to tell you, but is one of the most active and exciting centers of Persian and Iranian studies in the country. So we're always looking south to you to see what's going on in Irvine and how can we imitate. And they're always looking northwards towards us. I said one of, right? Among the. Of course, I place us among there as well. Dr. Rahimi's latest book, which she's going to be talking about with us tonight, is a really interesting and unique piece of scholarship. It deals with some very complex theoretical issues on identity. But does so in a way that, at least in my experience, is quite rare in the humanities and in humanist endeavors. It's a work that, as I say, deals with theoretical issues, but also reflects constantly, gives personal anecdotes about Dr. Rahimi's time as director of the center at UC Irvine, and on other memories from her life, and really I found, and I think you'll find too, changes the way we think of literary and cultural criticism and thought. In her book, the author is at one and the same time the subject, the observer, and the participant. So I'm very excited to hear more about her work tonight. I would also like to say that I'm equally excited to host Dr. Rahimi, because over the years I've seen how generous she's been with her time and energy. When I was a graduate student, and I was trying to remember what year it was, I think it was 2008, I happened to be in Southern California, and one of my professors said, you should really meet Nasrin Rahimi. And at the time she was director of the Samuel Jordan Center. I don't know if you remember, but you remember. And I really had nothing to say. I needed nothing from her, but my professor said you should really meet her. It was, I think, winter break. It was early January. I got in touch, and she said, yeah, of course, let's meet. And I think she sat down with at least half an hour at a time when the university was totally quiet. There was no one around, and she just made this time for a graduate student and took interest in my work. And I've seen over the years she's maintained that interest, and I've seen how much she invests in all of her students. So it's really truly an honor to be hosting you here at the University of Washington. And with that, I'll turn it over to our esteemed guest. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me see if this is working. Should I bring it closer, or? Being short has got disadvantage. Is it okay? Can you hear in the back? Okay. Perhaps if I lean, if I become inaudible, let me know. So first of all, I'm delighted to be here, and I'd like to begin by thanking Dr. Salim Kuru, the chair of the Department of Near Eastern Languages and Civilization, for inviting me to speak in this distinguished Afro-Asiabi lecture series. And he has been, I've known him only from afar and by reputation, and this today has been a pleasure, the time that I've spent with him. And I will say in my humble Turkish, teşekkür ederim. I would like to honor also the memory of Hushang Afrasiabi, whose passion for Persian literature his family immortalized by the creation of this series. I'm also grateful to be able to reunite with friends and colleagues. It was a pleasure to spend part of today with Maral, whom I know from UCI, as she pointed out, to see Samad Alavi, a delightful colleague as always, and Arzu Osanlu. I have had a little bit more time with her than I did last time, and I have to say that I have received such a warm, welcoming reception here, and to thank Sumi for all the arrangements. She has been just magnificent. So I'd like to begin by explaining a little bit the title that I've given my presentation. Culture Iranian Style encapsulates my experiences as the director of the Samuel Jordan Center for Persian Studies and Culture between the years 2006 and 2014. During that time, I encountered so many incompatible and contradictory representations and avocations of Iranian identity that I wondered if we Iranians had a particular style of understanding culture that needed to be studied and looked into. The more I observed and took note of how I was being guided and educated about what Iranian culture is or ought to be, the more puzzled I became about an apparent need to define culture, to define Iranian culture as a seemingly static construct. Before I became the director of the center, and I should explain, I came from Canada, I knew that contending with the diverse views of what is assumed to be the largest community of Iranians outside Iran in Southern California would be challenging. What I had not anticipated was the intensity and the pervasiveness of the impulse among a large number of my compatriots, Iranians, fellow Iranians, to maintain a narrow definition of Iranian cultural identity in opposition to all other attempts at self-definition. Pardon me. I thought that my dry mouth is only a California phenomenon, but apparently I have it here too. The multiplicity of Iranian cultural and community associations in Southern California appear to find their very reason for being in describing and illustrating what they believe to be the quote-unquote essence of Iranian culture. What such entities expected of a university center was to sanction their particular articulation and foreclose on all other possible entitlements to Iranian culture. Their demand, sweet, gentle, warm, friendly demand for the right way to study and speak about Iran emanated from a desire to reveal the truth about Iranian culture. While I believe that experimenting with coexistence of contradictory claims to Iranian cultural identity to be the proper work of a university cultural center, I found that it ran counter to individual or group investments, financial or ideological. Listening to the concerns and anxieties of the local Iranian American communities made me wonder to what extent I and my fellow Iranians in Southern California see culture through the lens of exile. Could the inflexibility vis-a-vis the idea of Iranian culture be seen as a product of exile and the type of nostalgia the scholar Svetlana Boym calls restorative nostalgia, which she says, quote unquote, puts emphasis on nostos, home, and proposes to rebuild the lost home and patch up the memory gaps? She, that is Svetlana Boym, distinguishes this kind of nostalgia from reflective nostalgia, which dwells, she says, in algia, pain, in longing and loss, the imperfect process of remembrance. Among Iranian Americans with whom I interacted in my capacity as director, there was far less concern, or it seemed to me, with vagaries of memory and a greater emphasis on reconstructions of an idealized past. Equally relevant to the tendency I observed among Southern California Iranians is Boehm's claim that restorative nostalgics, I quote, do not think of themselves as nostalgic. They believe their project is about truth, end of quote. Boehm's analysis also suggests that the single-minded preoccupation with setting the record straight about Iran is not exclusively about the past. In her words, fantasies of the past determined by needs of the present have a direct impact on realities of the future. Consideration of the future makes us take responsibility for our nostalgic tales, end of quote. These insights helped me better grasp why some of my compatriots, highly successful professionals and entrepreneurs, dedicated the little free time that they had to the task of supporting Iranian culture and its preservation and memorialization. I myself am all too aware of the pull of nostalgia, but I did not view my task at the university as the director as analogous to that of a museum director engaged in carefully selecting what would appear under the banner of Iranian culture. My personal preferences notwithstanding, I was committed to examining all aspects of Iranian culture, past and present, including how culture was being shaped in its theocracy and in stark contrast to the values that had been part of my own socialization, education, upbringing in Iran before 1979. And yet this intellectual clarity, seeming clarity on my part, and sense of purpose did not exempt me from being struck by the gap separating a carefully delineated, display-worthy representation of Iranian culture and its ever-changing and unruly facets. In the face of this disjuncture, I found myself eager to discover what prevented us, meaning myself too, from looking at all that lay outside a particular bounded view of culture and why certain aspects of Iranian culture caused us embarrassment. My sense of my use of the pronoun us here is deliberate and indicative of the recognition that in my position as an academic does not exempt me from the politics of the Iranian American community and that I am subject to the competing demands of its members. Naturally, I began by examining the term culture as understood in contemporary Persian. Farhang is the most commonly cited word in Persian today to denote culture, as in the literary and cultural phenomena steeped in Iranian history. Actually, interestingly, as you all know, there's a Farhang Foundation now in Southern California who would do magnificent work. Farhang is most frequently used to refer to high culture, but Farhang has not always meant what it connotes today. In his Tarifha va Mafahim Farhang, Dariush Ashuri, with expertise in linguistics and many other fields, literature, sociology, etc., states that the word originated in ancient Persian. Drawing on the work of another scholar, Sadegh Kia, he writes, I quote from Ashuri, though I'm translating, the ancient form of Farhang has not been found in what remains of the Avesta, and ancient Persian writings. In Pahlavi, or Middle Persian, the form is farahang. It is believed to be composed of the prefix fra, meaning anterior, and the ancient root of thang, meaning to draw. Ashuri lists instances of the root meaning in other Persian nouns and verbs and concludes that in Middle Persian, farahang, not farhang, would have primarily meant to educate. In Nyberg's Manual of Pahlavi, we find a confirmation of Ashuri's definition of farhang in Middle Persian as, I quote, education, breeding, training, instruction. Ashuri provides a variety of examples of the use of farhang in New Persian, the language we all speak now, before moving on to definitions of the term culture in European languages to ultimately arrive at the tale of what he describes the marriage of the expression farahang in Persian or farhang in Persian to the term culture in French, German, English, and how the meaning has changed. Ashuri cites terms used in European languages that help to demarcate the phonetic and etymological differences between the Iranian and European languages. The Persian word, he argues, transformed itself to signify culture, or as he says in the Persian text, kultur, or how it's spelled in German and French. Using the metaphor of marriage, Ashuri is careful to avoid a suggestion of linguistic colonization of Persian. And yet, most of his book is devoted to explaining the various meanings of culture in European languages and traditions, as if the marriage he invokes was not between two equal partners. Sayyid Hossein al-Nasr concurs with Ashuri about the process of transformation to which the Persian term for culture has been subjected. In his notes on the definition of Persian culture, Nasr writes, and I quote, "It must be remembered that the term farhang, which is now used universally in Persian as the equivalent of the English and the French term culture, in its present meaning came into being in the last century. In classical Persian texts, the closest term to culture was perhaps honar. Honar nazdi Iranian است و بس." Sorry, can't resist, which is now identified with art. Moreover, when the term culture was first established into Persian, this is Nasr writing, many authors preferred to use ma'arif, a very rich term that relates culture to knowledge and ultimately divine knowledge, which is connected to the term. This is the end of what he has to say. The shift away from associations with divine knowledge is captured in Lughatname de Khoda, and the entry under Farhang says, a complex mixture that encompasses knowledge, beliefs, arts, manners, laws, and habits, and all other abilities acquired by a human being as a member of a society. That's the Lughatname. Nasr and Ashuri take different positions vis-a-vis the transformations they observe in the meaning of the term Farhang. Ashuri finds the process a good reminder of the fact that culture is a living entity subject to transformation, while Nasr cites the neglected history of the unfavorable changes that have taken place. I'll quote from him, "Few modern Persians are even aware that the term culture has had a short history in the West, and that its Persian equivalent, Farhang, is itself a late arrival in the Persian language in its present connotation. In fact, to speak of Persian culture is itself a response to and an acceptance of the categories of an alien worldview whose dominance over the Persian world has done so much to diminish and weaken Persian culture." End of his quote. While decrying the erosion of the spiritual and transcendental dimensions of Ma'arif, Nasr finds a means of unity within the differences of opinion. And let me close this section by quoting him. A Persian who speaks of Farhang Iran, Persian or Iranian culture, is referring to everything that is positive in the life, thought, and art of Persian society and its people, and that identifies Persians as Persians. Contemporary Persians differ sharply as to what are the most important or least important elements of this Farhang and the historical causes involved in the development of its various strands. There's little disagreement, however, about its central role and the necessity to guard and preserve it, at least parts that are most congenial to the character and mental habits of particular persons in question. End of quote. The consensus the consensus Nasr identifies is more tenable with regard to the phenomena emanating from pre-modern Iran. Nasr's analysis pertains precisely to what he calls traditional Persian culture that he contrasts to modern manifestations. This particular focus then enables him to move to what he views as one of the remarkable characteristics of Persian culture, which he describes as unity in multiplicity, preserving an unmistakable unity while providing diverse intellectual, religious, spiritual, and artistic possibilities within its fold. These accommodating frames of reference and this long detour that I've taken to take us through the term are far less visible in Southern California. But is Iranian culture not replete with examples of inconsistencies and ruptures? I wondered what we could learn by returning to the more contested instances of cultural expression. In the remainder of this presentation, I will provide you with two specific examples, one from before and one from after the revolution, that reassured me that Iranian writers and artists are perhaps best positioned to tell us how Iranian culture can be depicted at any given historical juncture. The first example is a novel called Mashallah Khan dar bargah Harun al-Rashid, Mashallah Khan at the court of Harun al-Rashid, written by Iraj Pezeshkzad, our own beloved Iraj Pezeshkzad, who was a career diplomat during the reign of the second Pahlavi monarch, and has written other novels, of course. On the surface, this novel does not engage with the political scene, yet it offers a comic representation of Iranian preoccupations with rewriting history and the almost compulsive need to frame reality in terms of manipulated and ameliorated history. This is not the only novel, of course, as we know, in which Pezeshkzad tackles reinvention of history. The better-known novel, Dear Uncle Napoleon, is about a low-ranking army officer who becomes consumed with reworking his own military history and aggrandizing his role in the nation's struggle against foreign domination. Uncle Napoleon gradually starts believing his own fabrications, imagines himself at grave risk, and succumbs to his fears. While Dear Uncle Napoleon provides more immediate possible allusions to the politics of the Pahlavi era, Mashallah Khan dar bargah Harun al-Rashid makes no such obvious links. Nonetheless, self-aggrandizement is at the core of Mashallah Khan dar bargah Harun al-Rashid. Unlike Dear Uncle Napoleon, however, the novel's protagonist, Mashallah Khan, does exhibit some self-awareness, and while aspiring to reach beyond his means and abilities, he registers a reality against which his imagination must struggle. The contrast between the real and the imagined is underlined through Mashallah Khan's travels back in time. So essentially the novel is a novel about time travel. Temporal and geographic displacement creates a contestation between a constructed national identity and a national history that foregrounds a narrative on unbroken, uncontaminated triumph of, I'm sorry, I've missed a line here. Temporal and geographic displacement creates a contestation between a constructed national history that foregrounds a narrative of unbroken and uncontaminated triumph of an authentic Iran and a mere complicated history that acknowledges defeats, fragmentation, and transformation. The novel explores these disjunctures and highlights the folly of the dreams of grandiosity, past and present. Its focus on how history can be used as a platform for improving one's self-image draws attention to other approaches to history in Iranian cultural sphere. First published in 1958 as a serial in Etelat Javanan, a magazine intended obviously for youth, Mashallah Khan was published again in 1971 in Ferdowsi magazine. The initial serialization of the novel in a magazine for the youth suggests both the work's lightheartedness and a subtle hint that ambitious flights of fancy are more suitable for the domain of fiction than history. The novel narrates the story of this Mashallah, who's a lowly bank guard, who travels back from 20th century Iran to 8th century Baghdad. Mashallah's journey in time is instigated by his fascination with the Abbasid Khalif, Harun al-Rashid, in his Iranian vizier Jafar Barmaki, reputed to have been executed by the Khalif for having had an affair with one of Harun's sisters. The specific historical reasons for Jafar Barmaki's execution are far from certain, but Pezeshkzad's novel is less concerned with history than myths that supplant historical knowledge. With the help of an Indian yogi, I'm going to spare you the details, Mashallah succeeds in traveling back to Baghdad of Harun al-Rashid's time. And once he arrives there, he discovers that he has no means of communicating with the locals except through a version of Arabic he makes up by relying mostly on Arabic loanwords used in modern Persian. Not fazed by his linguistic shortcomings, Mashallah becomes focused on finding out, now that he is in Baghdad, whether he has arrived before Jafar has been executed. While the narrative does not explicitly state that his hope is to reverse the course of history and save Jafar from execution, it leads us to believe that Mashallah hopes to forestall the execution of Jafar Barmaki. And Jafar Barmaki, as we know in our general cultural history, is known as the vizier celebrated for the services he rendered to the Abbasids and for his ultimate betrayal by them. Mashallah's persistent inquiry in his approximation of Arabic, which is hilarious, I recommend that you read it, whether Jafar has been killed, give the locals the impression that he's looking for the famous Barmaki, Jafar Barmaki, in order to kill him. So, as a result, he himself is arrested and nearly is executed. What creates the comic effect is that having escaped the reality in which he's reminded of his low standing, Mashallah proves inadequate even in his fantasies that are supposed to be compensatory. These are his dreams, but in his dreams he always falls short. Mashallah's relentless running away from one form of danger after another during his journey back to the Abbasid undermines the possibility of finding safe refuge in the past. Time travel, in other words, does not prove an effective means of correcting reality. Interestingly, on the copyright page of the edition I own, and I brought with me from Iran long ago, is the second edition of the novel, there are echoes of Mashallah's playing fast and loose with history in modern Iranian life. In fact, there is a spillage of time travel from the narrative onto Iran's national calendar at the time of the publication of the second edition in 1976. There are three sets of dates that are marked on the page, the copyright page. And they follow two different calendars. The first two instances are in the Iranian solar calendar, 1337, 1958, 1350, 1971, while the second printing is noted to have been in the year 2535 or 1976. This last date, moving Iran from the 14th to the 26th century, marks a shift to the imperial calendar instituted by Mohammad Reza Shah Pahlavi in 1976. The imperial calendar that we all were there to experience, or I was, dislodged the Islamic heritage and replaced it with the pre-Islamic legacy, which has had a gravitational pull on the Iranian imagination in the modern era. In the life and times of the Shah, Ghulam Reza Afkhami traces the idea of the imperial calendar to Amir Abbas Amir Asadullah Alam, who in 1967, during his term as the Minister of Interior, had received an opinion from the Director of Legal Affairs that, I quote, the calendar Iranians used was an Arab calendar, and thus a disgrace. Iranians, he insisted, should have their own. The most appropriate, even to be designated as the beginning of the truly Iranian calendar, the event, was the ascent of Cyrus the Great to the Iranian throne. The world would, this is his words, the world would understand and applaud the choice of Cyrus. Was not only a great king, but also the first king to bring forth a concept of human rights. End of. This realignment of history was preceded, as we recall, by the lavish celebrations of 2,500 years of monarchy in 1971. Those celebrations, like the imperial calendar, were intended to distinguish Iran from its Muslim neighbors and make the rest of the world take note of Iran. This need to be noticed and noted can be construed as an expression of national pride and must be placed in the context of a longer history of Iran's encounter with modernity, which I won't go into here. It also reveals a remarkable investment in the construction and projection of a self-image based on a disavowal of the many complex aspects of the long history that was being celebrated. The way in which Iranian history was collapsed into an illusory narrative of continuous monarchy is illustrated in the pivotal event of the celebrations. I am just going to quote here. What was most noteworthy about the spectacle at Persepolis was the speech the Shah made to launch the celebration. Standing before the unadorned stone tomb of Cyrus the Great, founder of the Persian Empire, some 2.5 millennia before, the Shah offered salutations to his ancient predecessor and declared before his assembled guests, and of course foreign guests too, and to his countrymen via radio, television, he said, quote, "Rest in peace, Cyrus, for we are awake, and we will always stay awake." The Shah's address to the long-dead king, much like Mashallah Khan's longing to find Ja'far Barmaki, is founded on a basic recognition that neither Cyrus the Great nor Ja'far can be brought back into reality. And yet, this recognition is glossed over in the exercise of self-fulfillment. Similarly, in the fictional world inhabited by Mashallah, reality is suspended while he explores an alternative projected onto the past. In the case of the Iranian monarch, the past is sutured to the present. Standing in front of the tomb of Cyrus the Great was a graphic actualization of the imagined link between himself and the pre-Islamic king. In Pezeshk's comic rendition, the mining of historical past becomes a pastime of not only the elite and the intellectuals, but also an ordinary Iranian catching up on his education at night. In contrast to the sovereign and the intellectual elite engaged in reinscription of history, Mashallah is willing to play the part of the fool. His playing the role of the clown allows the reader glimpses of the flawed nature of his quest. His comic stumbling along the path of self-reinvention is in sharp contrast with his own. Sharp contrast with, with the lofty and serious goals of his compatriots dedicated to creating a modern nation. Although for Mashallah, history and historical truth, quote-unquote truth, are also tools for self-amelioration, his flights of fancy do not completely erase his profound feeling of inadequacy. In Mashallah Khan's case, what has been disavowed comes back repeatedly to haunt his fantasy. Temporal and geographic displacement take him outside himself, but he ends up feeling that this realm, albeit an imaginary one, is also a failure. An imagined ideal proves to be, for him, to be haunted by repressed fears and anxieties, not unlike the dream of modern Iran built on the shaky foundation of the disavowed past. The second and the final example I'd like to discuss is a book entitled Project Misplaced, The Rise and Fall of Simon Ordubadi, by the famous Iranian graphic artist Houman Mortazavi, who lives now in Iran. He has returned. Initially, he had envisioned the project as a series of newspaper advertisements that would run in the Persian language media in Los Angeles. Mortazavi's plan was to, quote-unquote, create a character based on the visual language and advertising trends of the expatriate community to promote some generic and useless services, and then to observe and document the reactions. In addition to the newspaper advertisements, Mortazavi created some flyers and stickers posted on walls, poles, telephone booths that existed then around the Iranian neighborhood in Westwood. From these initial ideas, there emerged a book published in 2004 consisting of a series of bilingual Persian-English posters capturing the fictional Simon Ordubadi, Houman Mortazavi himself, in various photographic poses, advertising services from a blending of spirituality and business to language lessons, matchmaking, traditional Persian dance lessons, and babysitting, to the art of the Morse code, the whole thing. Standing in for the transplanted Iranians who have settled in Westwood and have, I pronounce that as we do in Persian, incidentally, and have transformed West Los Angeles to Tehrangeles, Simon Ordubadi is the embodiment of the entrepreneurial Iranian immigrant, seemingly capable of juxtaposing the Iranian and the American cultural spheres, and even more importantly, confidentally fusing the two. Yet, these portraits do not paint a flattering image of Iranian Americans of Southern California. Far from the self-representation as the most highly educated and successful professional immigrants, the Iranian community invoked in these posters comes across as a conglomeration of misfits who are deeply misplaced vis-à-vis the lost homeland and their host country. What is particularly striking in Mortazavi's work is the uncovering of the very processes that made him at once part of that community and an outsider to it. In his preface to the book, Mortazavi describes the journey that took him from Tehran to Los Angeles. Having won a prestigious fellowship at an art institute in New York, Mortazavi left Tehran for New York in the mid-1990s. His hope was to leave behind graphic design for the realm of the fine arts. At that time, he was not, as he says, really conscious of the existence of Iranians in the United States. And his theory was that if you want to mingle with Iranians, stay in Iran. When his fellowship ended, he was nowhere near realizing the dream of becoming an artist. Out of money and without any other prospects, he set out for Los Angeles, assuming that once he had made enough money, he would once again be able to go back to New York. Instead, he ended up living and working as a graphic designer in the Los Angeles Iranian community. There he finds other signs of failure, casting a shadow over his dream of becoming an artist rather than a designer, graphic designer. I quote from Mortazavi, "There aren't many successful attempts at ingenuity in Tehrangeles. Quantity always trumps quality. You can see huge billboards in Westwood with big, bold Farsi typos, just as you can find typos in a $50 1/8 page and in the back pages of the free local Farsi newspaper. No one really seems to care about grammar, language, spelling, or other details of their advertising campaigns. It's as if their only goal is to have their own photos printed somewhere to remind themselves and others that they exist." End of quote. Simon Urdubadi is a product of the psychosocial, of this particular psychosocial circle. He asserts himself by advertising services to his fellow Iranians, while also nodding in the direction of the non-Iranian audience. But the particular and proud blending of Persian and English reveals linguistic and cultural disjunctures that call into question the normalized view of Iranians of Southern California as successfully adjusted in their host culture. At the same time, they reveal the uncanny proximity between delusional and creative constructions of identity. In one poster, we see Simon Urdubadi dressed in a suit top and a tie. The knot on his tie is crooked, visually making and foretelling other misalignments. Posing as, it says in the poster, Ostad, Simon's double chin and self-satisfied gaze convey pride. Shot from below, Urdubadi's picture dominates the poster and captures him looking down with a self-satisfied smirk. Framing the poster are captions in English and in Persian in varying and a sort of dizzying number of fonts. Reflecting the self-confidence of the man at the center of the poster are the words, and I quote directly, "I am gooder in defending you right." The Persian small print at the bottom of the poster reads, I'm translating literally, "Thanks to your moral, financial, and sexual support, Professor Simon Urdubadi, the inventor of a special blend of mysticism, business, and politics, announces his willingness to accept California's governorship. Hoping that by voting for me, we will be freed from the influence of the two blood-sucking and evil parties who are intent to destroy me and Iran." End of quote. Perhaps it's more than coincidental that the Austrian Arnold Schwarzenegger was elected governor of California just around the time that the book appeared. The English translation of the caption provided on the opposite page of the book, interestingly, leaves out the word sexual, jinsi, that he has in the Persian. The loss of sexual in the transition from English to Persian, from the Persian-speaking audience, suggests that there is a level of discomfort with becoming so closely associated. Other aspects of Persian texts are lost in Ordubadi's translations of himself. The Persian caption shows a linguistic flourish absent in the English version, which does not attempt to provide word-for-word translation. A literal translation of the last sentence in Persian would read, "By voting for me, you will wash the shameful stain off your face and your robe and dress California's independence in the robes of reality by curbing the influence of these two blood-sucking and evil parties who have girded themselves to destroy me and Iran." This is an attempt at replicating a register of official or bookish Persian, contrasted with the spoken and colloquial that demands attention. By virtue of its assumed mastery of rhetoric, the ornate language elevates the author-speaker's status to that of an educated individual. Persian is endowed, as we know, with a rich tradition of rhetoric, in which Iranians become versed through their education and exposure to a wonderful tradition of poetry. Ordubadi's attempts at replicating this venerable tradition produces a reminder of its untranslatability. Metaphors and syntax that are aesthetically pleasing to Persian speakers defy reproduction in another language and produce absurd results. At the same time, in the movement between Persian and English, Ordubadi's native Persian misses the mark and becomes a parody of the tradition of high rhetoric. This is best thought of in the clumsy verses brought out in the clumsy verses that Professor Ostad Ordubadi writes. من از خود چون گذشتم ز خود بی خود شدم در گل نشستم. That's his best attempt. Rendered on the opposite page as I've gone beyond myself, landed in flowers, I'm in ecstasy. None of the effort at rhyming of the original comes across in the English translation. The concept of transcending the material world to attain a higher truth is central to the Persian mystical tradition, but Ordubadi's transcendence lands him in the bed of flowers, back in the domain of the earthly, where Irfan, or knowledge of the higher truth, is melded with business and politics. The boldness of vision is part and parcel of the immigrant's zeal to infuse the markers of economic success with trappings of mysticism and spirituality. In the attempt to signal his ability to move across his former and new home, Ordubadi transports words and concepts from one into the other. Hence, business is not translated, instead it's transliterated as business. The movement from Persian into English is captured in the very bottom of the poster. It reads, I am friend, misspelled, I am your friend, then your enemy is mine. The typo in the word friend is like the word gooder, and it betrays rudimentary knowledge of English, while the attempt at high rhetoric in Persian reveals a stiltedness that calls into question the speaker's ease with Persian. Interestingly, on the poster, governorship is translated correctly into Persian as ostandari, but is reproduced in English and misspelled as presidency, and glaringly inserted into the Persian caption as if to highlight that the diasporic Iranians struggle to acquire agency in the new political sphere. The nefarious and mysterious forces that Ordubadi imagines are out to get him and Iran somehow also threaten California and its independence. Politics, thus understood, is infused with paranoia. Whether in Iran or in California, and the only solidarity and community that can be established through the convergence of enemies. The politics of enmity, evident in other posters, is adorned with Ordubadi's election campaign. His slogan is, today, unity, tomorrow, revenge. And he minces no words in terms of particularly about how he will deal with his rivals. A poster mostly in Persian, for instance, reads, "In the name of God," the invocation made customary after the Islamic Republic, the creation of the Islamic Republic, produces a mismatch with the political office sought in California. The message continues in the same vein, announcing our gratitude to you and deep hatred for the competitors and our competitors and other enemies. Please elect Simon Ordubadi as California governor. Cluttered with traces of an imagined Iran of the past and present and an imaginary construct of Irangelists, symbolic of California, the candidate's message misses the target. One man, one Iran. The caption in Persian, placed in the middle of the poster, framing the image of Ordubadi, waving, reinforces the logic of hatred and enmity present in the earlier message. Electing others is equal to betraying Iran. For the artist behind Project Misplaced, there was a similar coming to terms with his own fears and anxieties, becoming like the Los Angeles Iranians he derided. Having to confront them was productive and culminated in the recognition that he says in the introduction, there is no them, but only us. My mixed bag of emotions included shame and embarrassment about my previous and very angry self. The angry self gives way eventually to a more reflective self, not afraid to see himself as that other. I quote, Suleiman, or Simon, Ordubadi, is the embodiment of my own alter ego going through a torture test. But he is also our collective unconscious let loose in the wilderness. He is us when nobody is watching. He is us without fear of being judged or compared. The roots of his actions are deeply embedded in our culture and society. Hence his various incarnations as all too familiar figures in the contemporary capitalist marketplace: inventor, spiritual leader, political aspirant, teacher, and eventually babysitter. Ordubadi's earnestness is unsettling precisely because his efforts seem so misplaced. End of quote. Mortazavi's reflections serve as a good reminder to us that there are no static, perfect, and sanitized images and representations of Iranian culture, or any culture for that matter. In my view, there's no need to be anxious about how Iranian cultural manifestations are seen by others. The more pressing question before us might well be if we are willing to tolerate different iterations and embodiments of culture among ourselves. Thank you. Sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you for your patience.
This was really good. Like an Ordubadi and mashallah. Stories. Before taking more questions, I want to ask you one. Do you think what you told us, especially in the second example, in the first part of the project, specific for the American Iranians compared to the European ones, or do you make a comparison?
Yeah, I think it is specific to Iranian Americans because there are particular historical facts that we can't forget. I found when I moved from Canada, for instance, that everyone here, in California, I mean, not here, is that suddenly I went from being an Iranian to being a Persian. So it was fascinating to me why we were Persians. And the more I looked into it, the more I remembered the hostage crisis, the experience, that there's real historical reasons for Persian coming back up as a motive. So I find that there's much more. The Canadian community is now becoming more or less like the American community, but there are differences, I would say, from the Iranians in Sweden, the kinds of cultural enterprises they find themselves gravitated towards. Yeah. I don't disagree with you in terms of the richness of Iranian culture and the history and the way in which Iranian culture has always succeeded in bringing together different strands, that it has not, it's not that it hasn't looked elsewhere, because the Iran that we think about now, historically, has not always been this bounded land, right? The borders have been very different and at times quite porous. You know, one of the things that I learned from my colleague Turaj Daryai is that when we think of the the ruins, they were multilingual tablets, precisely because that empire needed to communicate not just in one language. So was it Iran, we could say, purely in terms of power, and because I don't know political science, well, I can't really comment on that. We could say in terms of power, Iran was superior and the empire was vast and they could capture many lands. But one of the things that, because I'm not an expert, but I've borrowed from other people's works, is that what it did in conquering is also taking elements from these cultures. So it is the culture that we rightly love and admire is an amalgam. It's not, there's no pure, but the only thing I'm saying is that there is no core you can go find and say, aha, this has always been the same. It hasn't been. In fact, I think that when we think about the arts, the visual arts, the miniature, where did the art of miniature will come from? There are, even in the most disastrous moments of Persian history, the Mongol invasion, there are things that we see surfacing later. So my argument is less that it is not rich and we shouldn't be proud of it, we should not talk about it. I started with this, the motivating force for me was that I would have people come and say, you know, how you are allowing us to talk about, for instance, someone or some phenomenon that is emerging today in the Islamic Republic is a way of betraying our culture. What I wanted to show, not just here but in the book as a whole, was that we really have a culture that's very capacious and inviting and welcoming. So I would hate to lose that and reduce it to either, on the one hand, something we can capture as an essence, or forget that it has also borrowed and lent to other cultures. I think that is the beauty that I want to retain. Yeah. Yeah, maybe I didn't communicate it well. Yeah, no, I think we agree on.
No, this was a good question. Good clarity to the topic, I guess. Right.
Yeah, and my thesis was that I don't see culture as static.
Well, you don't see it.
No, because I think like any culture, when you look at it, I think that it's constantly changing, right? In the same way that I think you could go to any moment in any country, in any part of even a nation, And if you look back historically, you can capture like the poetry, the writing, photography, or anything, and you look back and you see how much has changed. That's what I meant, is that I think we can't forget that we are living and we're trying to preserve something, but as we're preserving it, it's also changing. I wanted to say that it is dynamic. Oh, I don't really. I wish I could. I had a crystal ball and could. I really, the best way I see it is that it is always the best that we can expect is that unexpected emerges. That the creativity, in every single example that I went and dug out, or even as I used Simon or Dubadi to see what creative forces are always there. And when I said Hunar the Iranian is the best, but that it is that capacity, right? That creativity that I wanted to always see, particularly as director of the center, I wanted to foreground that. I wanted to emphasize that we don't need to be afraid. We don't need to think that we're losing our culture, because this is a phenomenon of immigration, exile, right? Because I too worry, oh my God, are we going to lose in the next generation the capacity to read poetry in Persian? And that's a natural concern, and it's an important concern. But at the same time, I see how the new generation in Iran, the younger generation in Iran, and also here in diaspora, is responding in its own creative ways.
No.
I agree with you completely. And also, it's the concept of the nation state, it's very recent. And so, of course, I myself grew up in a part of Iran in which the borders were literally porous. So speaking Azeri, Russian, and so on, it was, and the Armenian community there that had migrated and had its own history, and then traveling through the Caucasus, seeing why there was the Transcaucasia. Mm-hmm. There are so many amazing traces that one sees. And it is very humbling, and it's good to remember those things. And it's not, I agree with you, you can't discreetly take this out and say, oh, you see, this is the Iranian influence here, and that is the Armenian coming here. And I think that's the beauty of culture, is that to be able to see, I agree with you. No, I do think, I mean, that's what I observed and what was striking to me, that I had entered a different world. Because I was a member of diaspora. I had lived all these years in Canada, and I thought that, we would really, I would understand. But I found myself in need of education. So it was a humbling experience, but also understanding what particular factors had gone into shaping that community. So I would say, yes, some things are very distinctly. Like this book, Simon Ordubadi, is a product of only Los Angeles. It wouldn't make sense in Seattle. It doesn't make sense. It would not make sense in Boston or anywhere else. So I think that is part of the formation that I completely agree with you. Iranian American, on the other hand, the literary critic in my head wants to retain, because we now have, thanks to people like Persis Karim and other pioneers, we now have something we call Iranian American literature. By the way, which is not necessarily confined to these terms. Yeah. I guess I don't really, I would ask you if you could define, you could inform me better about sustainable, because my understanding of sustainability, it's very limited to sort of the kind of sustainability in environment and so on. How does it, in ethnomusicology, how is it understood? Absolutely, absolutely. Well, it would be, we see it in Persian literature, published in Iran or outside Iran, or, in the diaspora, the virtual realm. We see transformations of genre. We see writing of a kind that is precisely not bound to the way it was in the past. I have myself written, some time ago, I wrote in terms of experimental fiction. So writers experimenting with different modes of. So I think that it really has, for me as someone who's primarily in literature, it points to very exciting ways in which literature is not just in Iranian American literature, I see it. In fact, I would say the more cutting edge stuff is coming from Iran. Now, you just reminded me, what my colleague at UCI and another colleague, Hossein Umumi, we always have this very interesting discussion and debate with him, because he is very much, if I'm understanding correctly, on the side of preservation and maintaining, making sure the purity. I call it purity. He doesn't use that term. I can't find the right term. But for instance, he finds all of the new modes of music emerging. In particular, I think his nemesis is Mohsen Namju. He finds it just shocking, an abomination. So I'm aware of that debate that is there. And in literature, I think we celebrate the fact that it's all sorts of things are changing. Sometimes we can't keep up, right? Yeah. Of course. Yeah.
I will take one last question, and then we can chat during the reception.
Sure, we're glad to.
More informal.
just explain that better? Yeah, and it really has to do with the work that this really is very much comes out of my being the director of a center that was created, by the way, to celebrate Iranian culture, to acknowledge its achievements. So that was a part of the mission. What I found was, and let me just make it very concrete, there are, I worked with, and I had the pleasure of working with, maybe 10 different cultural associations in Southern California. They had very exact, precise ideas for what should be done. And what I was struck by was that, in these discussions, because it was important for me to be informed about what they wanted as community members, they were sometimes really so at odds with one another that I started thinking, why are we so worried about, if one element of this seeps into that? So my interest in coming to terms with culture is culture something that needs to be confined and put in a box that we all necessarily agree on? Because I think at any given moment, even before the revolution, even before the phenomenon that we're facing now and the life of immigrants and exiles, we really had different interpretations and views of culture. It's harder to remember that now. So I remember, for instance, the Festival of the Arts in Shiraz. I remember watching the festival, and I remember thinking and listening to older people saying, "Oh, this is an abomination. It's ruining our culture." So these phenomena are not new, right? So I wanted to just remind myself and for the sake of our students, particularly at Irvine, let's grapple with some of this. Let's work with it. Because I think, to me, what's important is not to accept things as received ideas, but rather be challenged by them. I think that nostalgia is a big part of it, yes. And I myself, in the book, I talk about it. I find it very easy to slip into certain modes and certain memories. So we can't be faulted for that. But when it becomes organized into an attempt to define and confine, then I think it becomes more of a problem collectively for us. Because I think that we really have a lot more capacity than we like to, So the different associations, my view was, you can all work together. Why can't you?
Yeah. Ending.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your questions. And as I mentioned, we are moving slowly across the corridor to the Walker Ames room for thanks to Sherzad Hanım. She carried them all the way from the Persian. She baked them all.